You didn't lose your social life. You finished it. Nobody around you can tell the difference, so you keep apologizing for it. In the next few minutes, the 5 stages that end here, and the one question that separates two kinds of alone. People look at an empty calendar and read tragedy. Nothing happened, though. No fight, no betrayal, no single moment where it broke. The circle just got smaller, quietly, the way a room gets darker in the evening without anybody touching the lights. And you let them think it, because explaining would have meant performing the exact thing you'd stopped being able to perform. Performative friendliness. The warm, weightless, agreeable version of a person this culture charges as the entry fee to a room. You paid it for years. You were pretty good at it. Then one day the fee stopped feeling like a fee and started feeling like a lie. Before I go further, notice something. If part of you got defensive at "you finished it," good, hold that. There's one question at the end of this, and it's the only thing separating people who walk alone because they finally started seeing clearly from people who walk alone because they got hurt and called it clarity. From the outside, those two are identical. Stage 1, the performance. Everyone who ends up here started somewhere else. You weren't born standing at the edge of the room. For years, you were extremely good at the middle of it. Stage 1 is where you're still trying. You laugh a half beat after everyone else because you're monitoring the room instead of listening to the joke. You tell people you should get lunch sometime, they say it back, and you both walk away satisfied by an exchange where nothing true was said. And you're not lying, exactly. You learned early that being liked is a skill, that there's a version of you that goes down easy and a version that makes people tilt their head. So you sanded the second one down, every time. What nobody tells you at this stage is that people come with different social architecture. Think about a diner. There's a counter up front, a row of stools, people sitting down, ordering, leaving. Nobody at that counter is having the worst night of their life out loud. Then there's the booth in the back. 2 seats, bad lighting, and whoever sits down is staying 3 hours. You were built like the booth, and you spent your 20s trying to run a counter. So the exhaustion you couldn't explain back then wasn't weakness, it was capacity. You were being asked to hold 15 shallow connections when your system is built to hold 1 deep one. Same energy, wrong shape. There's a label floating around for the kind of person I'm describing, the rarest personality type. It's flattering and a little dishonest because it makes this sound like a gift you were handed at birth. Nobody handed you this. You walked it in 5 stages. That was the first. Stage 2, the translation tax. This is where it starts costing you something you can't itemize. Most conversation runs on reflex. Somebody says a thing, you say the expected thing back, and it takes less thought than walking down a hallway. For you, it doesn't work that way. Someone asks how you've been. The honest answer is 4 paragraphs long and starts somewhere back in February. So you compress it. Good, busy. And that compression, flattening something with actual shape into something socially digestible, happens 40, 50 times a day. Everyone is a live translation, and you're the only person in the room who knows a translation is occurring. Arlie Hochschild, a sociologist at Berkeley, named it emotional labor. And underneath it, the mechanism that matters here, surface acting, displaying a feeling you don't have, on demand, because the situation requires it. She studied flight attendants, whose warmth was in the job description. The finding travels well past the airplane. Surface acting doesn't tire you the way effort tires you. It drains something else. People doing it report feeling less like themselves at the end of a shift. You've been surface acting since middle school. Nobody paid you. And genuinely, the whole time, the advice was, more exposure. Get out more. Push through it. Which is roughly like telling somebody who's translating all day that they'd be less exhausted if they just talked more. Here's the number everyone quotes. In 1990, 3% of Americans said they had no close friends. By 2021, it was 12%. Over the same stretch, the share with 10 or more close friends fell from 33% to 13%. Every headline reads that one way, a country getting lonelier. It's two completely different stories wearing the same coat. Because a survey can't tell the difference between a person who got left behind and a person who quietly stopped showing up. One of those is a wound. The other is a decision nobody announced, not even to themselves. They look identical on a Sunday afternoon. And the assumption, every time, from everyone, is that you're the first one. You've been counted in somebody else's tragedy for years. Which brings me to the hinge the whole thing turns on. The mask didn't hide you. It replaced you, one room at a time. Stage 3. The mask stops feeling like a mask. Your brain has a housekeeping habit called habituation. Anything constant, it stops flagging. The hum of a refrigerator disappears about 90 seconds after you walk into the kitchen. The sound is still there, your brain just quit forwarding the memo. The same thing happens to the performance. Somewhere in stage 3, you stop noticing you're doing it, and that sounds like relief. It's actually the most dangerous stretch of the road, because now there's no seam. You can't find the line where you stop and the agreeable version starts. You come home from a good night out feeling scraped hollow, and you can't point to one thing that went wrong, because nothing did. What comes next is strange, and almost nobody warns you about it. You start seeing. It's like the audio separating into tracks. You watch someone compliment a coworker and you can hear that it's a status move. You notice that just be yourself comes with a quiet list of conditions attached. You clock the unwritten rules of a group. Who's allowed to interrupt? Who has to laugh first? Which opinions are decorative and which ones are load-bearing? Once you can hear that layer, you can't stop hearing it. A conversation that used to be pleasant becomes something you're reading the subtitles of. And that's what ends stage 3, because you can't perform warmth convincingly while narrating the mechanics of it in your head. So the performance degrades. You go quiet a beat too long. You answer a question honestly at a party and watch the temperature drop 3 degrees. And people name you for it fast. Cold, arrogant, thinks he's above it, went weird after the move. Here's the correction nobody offers on your behalf. You didn't get colder. You stopped producing warmth on a schedule that had nothing to do with whether you felt any. Those are different things, and only one of them is a personality. Now, one honest sentence, and it's aimed at some of you, not all of you. Some of you aren't seeing clearly. You're just tired, and you're calling it clarity, because clarity sounds chosen and tired sounds like losing. Sit with that one. We come back to it at the end. Let me give you a picture, because stage 3 is where this becomes visible from the outside. A guy named Wes drove 40 minutes to his 10-year high school reunion. Hotel ballroom outside Dayton, cash bar, a laminated poster board of yearbook photos propped by the door. He ate beforehand at the Waffle House across the parking lot, by himself, specifically so he wouldn't have to stand in a buffet line making conversation with a plate in his hand. He lasted an hour and 10 minutes. Nobody was cruel to him. Everyone was lovely, which was somehow the harder version. 12 conversations, 4 minutes each, every one ending with, "We should catch up." Someone asked what he'd been up to lately, and Wes heard himself answer, "Mostly just staying." The guy laughed like it was a bit and moved on. And here's the detail that doesn't fit the story people tell about a man who leaves early. Wes is the one who's kept that class group text alive for 6 years. Birthdays, somebody's mom in the hospital. He's the reason half that ballroom knew each other's news at all. He just can't do it 4 minutes at a time with a drink in his hand. He left before the slideshow. Nobody followed him out. And on the drive back, he did the thing you've probably done 100 times. Ran the whole night backward, looking for the moment where he broke it. There wasn't one. If you've ever driven home running that same tape, subscribe. This channel is built for people who keep auditing themselves for a crime that was never committed. Because Wes was right about one thing that night and badly wrong about something bigger. And stage 4 is where you find out which was which. Stage 4. The circle narrows, and it isn't rejection. Here's what Wes got wrong on that drive. He read a shrinking circle as evidence that he was failing at people. What had actually happened is that his tolerance for the 4-minute version of a human being had collapsed. And every relationship that only ever ran on 4 minutes had nothing underneath it to stand on. That's filtration. It just never feels like filtration while it's happening. It feels like being left, and it shows up in 4 rooms. At the family table, you're the one who goes quiet in the 3rd round of the same argument and gets asked why you're being difficult. With friends, you're the one who cancels last. You don't say no in the moment. You say yes, then spend 4 days dreading a Thursday you could have declined in 2 seconds. In love, it gets crueler. People come toward you for the depth and then get frustrated with the distance. The same trait, viewed from opposite sides of the bed. At work, you stay quiet for half a meeting, say one precise thing, and the room reacts like the quiet one suddenly grew an opinion. You'd had it since minute 2. You were waiting for it to be worth something. You probably didn't get hit by all 4. Almost nobody escapes all 4 either. And underneath every one of them is the same thing. You're not bad with people. You've stopped being able to run the counter, and the counter is where most relationships get conducted, which is where that flattering label turns into a trap. Being called the rarest personality type makes it sound like the shrinking is the achievement. Wrong direction. The shrinking is what happens when your standards for contact finally catch up with your capacity for it. A side effect that keeps getting handed a trophy. I want to see something, and it takes 4 seconds. If one of those rooms hit harder than the rest, put 1 word in the comments. Just the room. Table, friends, love, work. 1 word, no explanation. I promise that comment section is going to be more honest than any survey ever written on this. Stage 5. Approval stops working on you. This is the part nobody puts in the description of the rarest personality type because it doesn't photograph well. There's a study I think about a lot. Thuy Nguyen and her colleagues at the University of Rochester ran experiments on what happens in the first 15 minutes of being alone. What they found is that solitude turns the volume down on everything, the highs and the lows both. Anger, excitement, anxiety, all of it settles. That's the mechanism people mistake for depression. But the finding underneath it is the one that matters. When solitude was chosen, it restored people. When it was imposed, it wrecked them. Same room, same silence, same 15 minutes. And the deciding variable was whether the person had walked in on purpose. That's the whole road, in one experiment. And what solitude gives back, when it's the chosen kind, has a name. Self-concept clarity. It's how sharply you can describe who you are without checking anyone's face first. That's what the counter years were quietly eating. Every time you sanded down the version that made people tilt their head, the outline got blurrier, until you genuinely couldn't tell your preferences from your accommodations. Stage 5 is when the outline comes back, and you'll know by a very unglamorous sign. Praise stops moving you as much. So does criticism. Somebody's approval arrives, and it's pleasant, the way good weather is pleasant, and it doesn't reorganize your week. Fair warning, because this part rarely gets told honestly. It doesn't feel good at first. It feels like nothing. You've taken down the only thing that was telling you where you stood, and the space underneath looks worse than it did with the wallpaper on. Bare drywall, old glue, patches where something used to hang. That's the middle of the job, and the middle of the job looks like damage every time. So, the question I promised you. Because there are 3 ways to end up walking alone, and from the outside, they're indistinguishable. The first is the wound. You got hurt badly, and you built the architecture afterward to make sure it couldn't happen twice. It works. It also has to be maintained, constantly, which is why it's so tiring. The second is pride. Somewhere along the way, distance stopped being what you needed and started being what you were better than everyone for having. That one's hardest to spot from the inside because it uses the same vocabulary as the third. And the third is clarity. You know what a real conversation feels like now, and you'd rather have 3 of them a year than 300 of the other kind. Here's how you tell them apart. It's one question, and it isn't, do you like being alone? All 3 say yes to that. The question is, when the right person walks in, can you still open? The wound can't. The wound checks the exits. Pride won't. Pride has already decided the room isn't worth it. Clarity opens immediately, without ceremony, and closes again just as easily when the evening's over. So the rarest personality type isn't the one that ends up alone. Plenty of people end up alone. It's the one that can still open the door. You're allowed to be alone without it, meaning something is wrong with you. 3 things to do with that, starting this week. 1. Stop auditing the exit. When you leave something early, don't run the tape looking for the moment you broke it. Just log what you left and what you felt. Within a month, you'll see the pattern is about the room. 2. Say the true version once a week. 1 sentence to 1 person with no compression. The 4-paragraph answer cut down to an honest 30 seconds instead of a digestible 4 words. Do it to find out whether the translation muscle still works, because that's the one that atrophies. 3. And this is the one that matters most. Once a month, open the door on purpose. Not a party. 1 person, 1 long thing. A drive, a meal, a walk with no scheduled end. Because what separates the 3rd kind of alone from the first 2 comes down to 1 thing: whether you can still choose otherwise. Hours spent by yourself have nothing to do with it. Solitude that can't be interrupted stopped being solitude a while ago. That's the wound wearing clarity's clothes. Wes still leaves early. That didn't change. What changed is that he stopped running the tape on the drive home. And last spring, when someone from that ballroom texted the group about a divorce, Wes was the one who called. Not the group. Not the 12 people who'd said we should catch up. He talked to her for 2 hours in a grocery store parking lot with the engine running. Nobody at that reunion will ever know that happened. He's still, to most of that room, the guy who left before the slideshow. If any part of this was a description of your actual life, subscribe. Everything on this channel gets written for the people that survey counted wrong. You were never too much for people. You were just done being the smallest version of yourself that a room could comfortably hold.